In the year 2047, Earth was on the edge of something terrible. For years, scientists had been shouting warnings about climate change, running out of resources and animals going extinct, but most people ignored them. Governments didn't listen. Big companies cared more about money than the planet, and regular folks went on with their lives, buying things they didn't need and throwing away stuff like it didn't matter. One woman stood out in this mess, a scientist who had spent her life studying the environment. She wasn't famous or rich, she just wanted to save the world. Her name doesn't matter here, but what she did does. This scientist had been working tirelessly for decades, poring over data, writing reports, and giving speeches. She had even traveled around the globe, trying to convince leaders that if they didn't act soon, it would be too late. But no one listened. Politicians smiled politely during meetings, but did nothing afterward. Companies laughed behind closed doors, saying her predictions were exaggerated. Even ordinary people shrugged off her warnings, thinking, if it's really that bad, someone will fix it. They kept driving gas-guzzling cars, using plastic bags, and wasting energy without a second thought. Then came the day when everything changed, or at least should have. The scientist was invited to speak at the United Nations. It was a big stage filled with important people from all over the world. Cameras flashed as she walked up to the podium, holding a thick folder full of charts and graphs. At first, her voice was calm, explaining how rising temperatures were melting ice caps, flooding cities and killing wildlife. She talked about droughts drying up rivers and farms, leaving millions hungry. But then something happened. As she flipped through her slides, showing images of wildfires burning forests and oceans choked with trash, her voice cracked. Tears welled up in her eyes. By the end of her presentation, she wasn't speaking like a scientist anymore. She was pleading, almost begging. "This is your last chance," she said, choking back sobs. "If you don't do something now, there won't be another chance." The room fell silent. Some people looked uncomfortable, others rolled their eyes, and a few whispered jokes under their breath. News channels played clips of her crying, turning her heartfelt plea into a punchline. Late-night comedians made fun of her, calling her dramatic and overly emotional. Social media exploded with memes mocking her breakdown. Meanwhile, fossil fuel executives raised their champagne glasses, celebrating record profits. Life went on. As usual, that same year, Europe experienced a heat wave unlike anything seen before. Temperatures soared so high that roads buckled, train tracks warped, and crops shriveled in the fields. Thousands of people died, especially the elderly and those without air conditioning. Forests turned into tinderboxes and massive wildfires erupted, swallowing entire towns. Smoke filled the skies, making it hard to breathe. Hospitals overflowed with patients suffering from heat stroke and respiratory problems. Yet, even after such devastation, people found ways to deny reality. Some claimed the heat wave was a freak event, not proof of climate change. Others said it was natural, ignoring decades of scientific evidence pointing to human activity as the main cause. A few conspiracy theorists even suggested the whole thing was fake news created by governments to control the population. As the months passed, other parts of the world started feeling the effects too. In Asia, monsoon rains became unpredictable, destroying villages and washing away farmland. In Africa, deserts expanded, forcing families to leave their homes in search of water and food. In South America, once lush rainforests were cut down faster than ever, replaced by cattle ranches and soybean fields. Everywhere you looked, nature was screaming for help, but humanity refused to hear. Back in her lab, the scientist tried to stay hopeful. She worked longer hours, analyzing new data and collaborating with colleagues worldwide. But deep down, she knew time was running out. Every graph showed the same trend. Things were getting worse, not better. One night, staring at a map covered in red zones representing danger areas, she whispered to herself, "They'll regret it someday." Someday came sooner than anyone expected. By the end of 2047, strange things began happening. Oceans heated up rapidly, causing hurricanes to grow stronger and more frequent. Glaciers crumbled into the sea, raising water levels overnight. Animals migrated farther north or south, searching for cooler climates, only to find nowhere safe to go. Fish disappeared from warming waters, leaving fishermen jobless and communities starving, and still, many refused to connect the dots. When a major city flooded, politicians blamed poor infrastructure instead of admitting the real problem. When farmers couldn't grow crops due to extreme weather, agribusinesses pushed genetically modified seeds rather than addressing root causes. People adapted to hardships, thinking they were isolated incidents rather than pieces of a global puzzle falling apart. Little did they know, the worst was yet to come. Somewhere beneath the frozen Arctic tundra, ancient reserves of methane trapped for thousands of years began to thaw. Scientists had warned about this tipping point, where released methane would accelerate global warming beyond control. Once triggered, there would be no stopping it. And sure enough, sensors detected alarming spikes in atmospheric methane levels. The scientist watched the numbers climb with growing dread. She sent urgent emails to government officials urging immediate action. But her messages went unanswered, buried under piles of bureaucracy and indifference. Frustrated and exhausted, she finally gave up. There was nothing left to say, nothing left to do. Humanity had chosen its path, and now it would face the consequences. By early 2050, the signs of collapse were impossible to ignore. Skies darkened not from clouds, but from ash and smoke blanketing the planet. Rivers dried up, leaving behind cracked beds of dirt. Crops failed en masse, leading to widespread famine. Millions fled coastal cities as rising seas swallowed neighborhoods. Whole refugees poured across borders, sparking fights over scarce resources. Violence erupted everywhere, fueled by desperation and fear. Through all this chaos, a mysterious message appeared on TV screens, radios, and smartphones. No one knew where it came from or who sent it. All they heard were chilling words. You ignored every warning. Now suffer the consequences. The message repeated endlessly, haunting survivors like a ghostly echo. Was it a prophecy? A punishment? Or simply a reminder of humanity's failures? No one could answer. What was clear, however, was that Earth itself seemed alive and angry. Its patience had run out, its generosity had been squandered, and now it demanded payback. The year 2050 arrived, and the world was no longer the same. The changes were not gradual. They came crashing down like a tidal wave that no one could escape. People woke up to skies that weren't blue anymore, but a suffocating gray-black haze. It wasn't clouds causing this darkness, it was ash from endless wildfires, smoke billowing out of industrial ruins, and dust kicked up by relentless winds tearing through barren lands. The air felt heavy, almost toxic, making it hard to breathe. Without covering your mouth with a cloth, for most people, life had become a daily struggle just to survive. Food was scarce because crops couldn't grow in soil, poisoned by chemicals or scorched by extreme heat. Supermarkets emptied quickly, and fights broke out over the last cans of beans or bottles of water. In cities, buildings stood abandoned, their windows shattered, walls covered in graffiti warning others to stay away. Streets once filled with laughter and car horns now echoed only with silence, or sometimes the distant sound of gunfire as desperate groups fought for control of whatever resources remained. People who lived near coastlines faced an even worse fate. Rising sea levels swallowed entire neighborhoods overnight. Families woke up to find seawater flooding their homes, forcing them to flee with nothing but the clothes on their backs. Entire communities disappeared under the waves, places where kids used to play soccer, couples strolled hand in hand along beaches, and fishermen cast nets into the ocean. Now, those memories were buried beneath salt water, unreachable and forgotten. Inland areas weren't safe either. Rivers dried up, leaving behind cracked earth and dead fish rotting in shallow pools. Farmers watched helplessly as their fields turned into deserts, unable to grow anything despite working tirelessly under the scorching sun. Livestock died off due to lack of water and feed. Hunger spread like wildfire, hitting children and the elderly hardest. People resorted to eating weeds and insects, hoping to keep starvation at bay for just one more day. Meanwhile, the weather grew increasingly unpredictable. One week brought torrential rains that flooded towns and washed away roads. The next week saw temperatures soar so high that asphalt melted and power lines sagged dangerously close to the ground. Then came violent storms unlike anything recorded before, hurricanes strong enough to flatten entire cities, tornadoes ripping through countrysides, and lightning strikes setting forests ablaze. Survivors huddled together in makeshift shelters, praying each night would pass without disaster striking again. Amidst all this chaos, something strange began happening. Across every screen, televisions, phones, laptops, a message appeared repeatedly. You ignored every warning. Now suffer the consequences. At first, people thought it was some kind of prank or virus infecting devices worldwide. But when the message kept showing up, regardless of whether the device was connected to the internet or powered on manually, panic set in. No one knew who or was behind the broadcast. Some speculated it might be survivors hiding in space colonies, sending a grim reminder of humanity's downfall. Others believed it was an artificial intelligence left behind after governments collapsed, programmed to deliver a final verdict on human failure. A few conspiracy theorists claimed aliens were responsible, using Earth's destruction as punishment for mankind's arrogance. Whatever the truth, the message haunted everyone who saw it. Those words, "You ignored every warning," cut deep, stirring guilt and fear in equal measure. As days turned into weeks, communication systems started failing. Cell towers fell silent, internet connections dropped permanently, and radio signals faded into static. Without reliable ways to share information, people were cut off from one another, left isolated in a world falling apart around them. Governments that had barely held on until then crumbled completely. Military forces disbanded, police vanished, and lawlessness took over. Gangs roamed freely, looting whatever they could find and killing anyone who got in their way. Survivors formed small groups, banding together for protection and survival. These clusters became the new foundation of society, though calling it society might have been generous. They scavenged abandoned buildings for supplies, boiled dirty water to drink, and burned scraps of furniture to stay warm at night. Trust was rare. Betrayal was common. Everyone looked out for themselves first, knowing that kindness often meant risking your own life. Despite the bleakness, moments of humanity still flickered here and there. In one ruined city, a group of survivors found an old piano lying in the rubble of a concert hall. Though its keys were chipped and some notes refused to sound, someone sat down and played anyway. The music, soft, broken, yet beautiful, brought tears to eyes hardened by years of suffering. For a brief moment, people forgot their hunger, their pain, and simply listened. In another place, a mother taught her young son how to read using tattered pages salvaged from a library. She traced letters onto his palm when ink ran out, whispering stories of heroes and adventures to keep hope alive in his heart. Even in the darkest times, these small acts of resilience reminded everyone that being human wasn't just about surviving, it was about finding meaning in the face of despair. But such moments were fleeting. Reality always returned, harsh and unrelenting. As winter approached, temperatures plummeted, turning already difficult conditions into a fight for survival. Snowstorms buried settlements, trapping people inside freezing homes with dwindling food supplies. Many succumbed to cold and hunger, their bodies laid to rest in shallow graves dug into frozen ground. Those who survived emerged thinner, weaker, and more determined than ever to endure. Yet, amidst the death and destruction, whispers of possibility began circulating. Rumors spoke of hidden bunkers containing technology capable of reversing some of the damage done to the planet. Others claimed scientists had developed machines before civilization collapsed, machines designed to clean the air, restore ecosystems, or stabilize the climate. Whether any of these rumors were true remained unknown, but they fueled dreams of redemption among survivors. One group decided to take action based on these whispers. They pooled whatever tools and knowledge they had, planning expeditions beyond their safe zones to search for answers. Risking everything, they ventured into dangerous territories overrun by hostile gangs and treacherous landscapes. Each step forward felt like walking toward salvation or doom. Back home, others stayed behind to maintain fragile shelters and care for the sick and injured. Among them was a teenager who had grown up knowing nothing but ruin. To him, tales of green forests, clear rivers, and starry skies seemed like fairy tales told to comfort restless minds. Yet he clung to those stories, believing somewhere, somehow, a better future awaited. He studied old books and manuals, teaching himself how things worked, dreaming of rebuilding what had been lost. As the months dragged on, tensions rose within survivor camps. Arguments erupted over rationing food, sharing shelter, and deciding which risks were worth taking. Some questioned whether searching for solutions was futile, arguing that humanity deserved its fate. Others insisted giving up wasn't an option, clinging to hope like a lifeline in stormy seas. Through it all, the mysterious message continued playing on broken screens and dying radios. Its tone never changed, its words never softened. It served as both a curse and a challenge, a reminder of humanity's mistakes and a call to rise above them. And so, against all odds, people pressed on. They adapted, innovated, and endured, driven by the faint glimmer of a dream that Earth, scarred and battered though it may be, still held the potential for renewal. All it needed was a chance, and perhaps, just perhaps, humanity hadn't run out of chances quite yet. The world had become a patchwork of ruins, with small clusters of survivors scattered across what was left of the planet. Each group lived in their own little corner of despair, doing whatever it took to stay alive. In one such place, tucked away in the remains of an old city, a community of about 30 people had managed to carve out a fragile existence. They called it the compound, though it wasn't much more than a collection of patched-up buildings surrounded by walls. Made from scrap metal and broken furniture. At the heart of this group was a man who had once been an engineer before everything fell apart. He wasn't particularly strong or charismatic, but he had a knack for fixing things, a skill that made him invaluable in a world where nothing worked anymore. People looked to him for guidance, trusting his steady hands and calm demeanor. Though he never asked for leadership, it found him anyway. Like water flowing into cracks, among the survivors was a teenage girl who had grown up, knowing only the harshness of this new reality. She didn't remember a time when food came from grocery stores or water flowed freely from taps. Her earliest memories were of scavenging through abandoned houses, dodging gangs, and learning how to stretch meager supplies to last as long as possible. But despite the hardships, she carried a spark of curiosity inside her, a desire to understand why the world had ended and whether anything could be done to fix it. One day, while exploring the outskirts of the city, the group stumbled upon something extraordinary, an underground bunker hidden beneath the rubble of an old government building. The entrance had been buried under layers of debris, but after hours of digging, they uncovered a heavy steel door marked with faded warnings about restricted access. Inside, they found rows of dusty shelves stacked with canned goods, medical supplies, and tools, treasures beyond imagination in this broken world. But the real prize lay deeper within the bunker. In a locked room at the back, they discovered racks of computer servers and filing cabinets stuffed with documents. Among them were detailed plans for a machine designed to extract methane from the atmosphere and stabilize the climate. For the first time in years, hope flickered to life among the survivors. Here was proof that humanity hadn't given up entirely, even in its darkest hour. Someone had tried to find a solution. However, there was a catch. Building the machine required materials that were nearly impossible to come by now. Some parts were rare metals mined from deep underground. Others were specialized components manufactured using technology long since lost. The blueprints might as well have been written in another language for all the good they did without the means to follow them. Still, the engineer refused to let doubt creep in. If there was even a sliver of a chance to save what was left of the planet, he believed it was worth pursuing. With the help of the teenager who proved surprisingly quick at deciphering technical drawings, they began planning expeditions to gather the necessary materials. It wouldn't be easy. Some items were hundreds of miles away, guarded by dangerous Terrain and desperate survivors willing to kill for scraps. Before setting out, the group faced tough decisions. Who would go? What weapons should they take? How much food could they spare without starving those left behind? Every choice felt like walking a tightrope, balancing risk against reward. Eventually, they settled on sending a small team, led by the engineer, to scout locations and retrieve what they needed. Everyone else stayed behind to protect the compound and keep working on assembling pieces of the machine from whatever scraps they already had. As the team prepared to leave, the teenager surprised everyone by insisting on joining them. At first, the engineer argued against it, worried about putting her in danger. But she stood firm, pointing out that her knowledge of the blueprints made her essential to identifying the right parts. Reluctantly, he agreed, knowing she was probably right. Their journey was grueling. The landscape outside the compound was a wasteland of cracked highways, collapsed bridges, and fields reduced to dust. Wildfires burned in the distance, their smoke choking the air. Mutated animals roamed freely, their eyes glowing with hunger. And then there were the humans' gangs of scavengers, who preyed on anyone foolish enough to venture far from safety. The team encountered countless obstacles along the way. Once, they barely escaped a pack of feral dogs that chased them through the ruins of an old factory. Another time, they stumbled into a trap set by a rival group, forcing them to fight their way out with knives and makeshift clubs. Supplies dwindled faster than expected, leaving them weak and exhausted. Nights were spent huddled around small fires, listening to the eerie sounds of the wilderness closing in around them. Despite the hardships, the teenager's determination never wavered. She studied the blueprints constantly, memorizing every detail so she could recognize the parts they needed instantly. When they finally reached their first destination, an abandoned industrial site overrun with weeds and rust, she immediately spotted a piece of equipment listed in the plans. Dragging it free from the wreckage, she felt a surge of pride mixed with relief. Maybe, just maybe, they really could pull this off. Back at the compound, life continued in tense anticipation. Those left behind worked tirelessly to assemble the machine, piecing together salvaged parts and improvising solutions whenever necessary. The teenager had taught them enough about the design that they could make progress without her, though mistakes were inevitable. More than once, sparks flew. As faulty wiring caused short circuits, forcing them to start over, tensions ran high as weeks turned into months. Food rations grew thinner, and tempers flared over minor disagreements. Some began whispering that the whole project was a waste of time, that no machine could undo the damage humanity had done. Others clung to faith, believing the effort itself was meaningful, even if success seemed unlikely. Meanwhile, strange occurrences added to the unease. Tools went missing overnight, only to reappear days later in odd places. Equipment malfunctioned inexplicably, then started working again just as suddenly. At night, faint whispers drifted through the empty streets outside the compound, too soft to understand, but loud enough to send shivers down spines. Was it paranoia setting in, or was something or someone watching them? When the expedition team finally returned, battered and bruised but carrying the last critical component, cheers erupted throughout the compound. For the first time in ages, people allowed themselves to feel a glimmer of optimism. The machine was almost complete. All that remained was to install the final part and power it up, but powering it up came with risks. The device required immense energy, which meant channeling electricity from unstable generators cobbled together from junkyard parts. If something went wrong, the resulting explosion could destroy not only the machine, but also the entire compound. No one wanted to think about failure, not after coming so far, but the possibility loomed large. The engineer gathered everyone for a meeting. He explained the situation plainly, laying out the dangers alongside the potential rewards. If we succeed, he said, we might give Earth a fighting chance. If we fail? His voice trailed off, but everyone understood. Failure meant certain death for the machine, for the compound, and possibly for any hope of rebuilding civilization. A vote was taken, and the decision was unanimous. They would try. There was no turning back now. As preparations began, the Teenager volunteered to assist the engineer during the activation process. Despite protests from others who wanted to shield her from harm, she insisted. "I've been part of this from the start," she said firmly. "I'm staying until the end." With the plan set, the compound braced itself for what might be its final stand. Survivors gathered belongings, wrote messages to loved ones, and said quiet prayers. Children clung to parents, unsure why everyone seemed so solemn. Outside, the sky remained dark, heavy with ash and smoke. The air smelled of burning wood and decay. As the moment approached, the engineer took a deep breath and flipped the switch. Lights flickered, machinery whirred to life, and the ground trembled beneath their feet. Sparks flew, and the hum of electricity filled the air. Everyone held their breath, waiting to see if the gamble would pay off or if they had sealed their doom. The moment the switch was flipped, the compound erupted into chaos. The machine roared to life with a deafening hum, its metal frame vibrating violently as if it might tear itself apart. Sparks flew from exposed wires, and the air crackled with electricity. Everyone backed away instinctively, shielding their faces from the blinding light that pulsed in rhythm with the machine's groaning. It was both terrifying and mesmerizing, a raw display of power that no one had seen in years. The engineer and the teenager stood closest to the machine, their hands trembling as they adjusted dials and monitored gauges. Sweat poured down their faces, not just from the heat radiating off the device, but also from the weight of what they were attempting. One wrong move could mean disaster. If the energy surged too high or the system overloaded, the explosion would level everything within a mile radius. Yet neither of them hesitated. They focused on the task at hand, trusting each other completely. Outside, the ground began to shake. At first, it was subtle, like distant thunder rumbling beneath their feet. But soon the tremors grew stronger, rattling windows and sending debris tumbling from unstable rooftops. Survivors inside the compound exchanged worried glances. Was this part of the process? Or was the Earth rejecting their attempt to fix it? "Keep going," the engineer shouted. Over the noise, his voice hoarse but steady. "We're almost there." The teenager nodded, her fingers flying across the controls. She adjusted valves and redirected power flows, trying to stabilize the machine as it strained against its limits. Her heart pounded in her chest, each beat echoing the urgency of the situation. This wasn't just about saving themselves. It was about proving that humanity still had a chance, that even after all the mistakes, all the destruction, people could come together to make things right, but the machine wasn't cooperating. Warning lights flashed red and alarms blared, signaling critical stress points in the system. The engineer grabbed a wrench and crawled underneath the massive contraption, tightening bolts and reinforcing connections. His movements were frantic yet precise, years of experience guiding him through the chaos. Above him, the teenager continued, working, her eyes scanning readouts and making split-second decisions. Suddenly, a loud snap echoed through the room. A cable disconnected, whipping through the air like a live snake. The teenager ducked just in time, narrowly avoiding being struck. Smoke billowed from the damaged section, and the machine's hum turned into an ear-splitting screech. Panic rippled through the crowd of survivors watching from a safe distance. Some screamed, others cried, and a few bolted for the exits, convinced. The end was near. "We can't stop now," the teenager yelled, grabbing another cable and reconnecting it despite the risk of electrocution. Her hands burned where the insulation melted, but she ignored the pain. "If we give up, we lose everything." The engineer emerged from beneath the machine, his face streaked with grease and sweat. He locked eyes with her, silently communicating determination and trust. Together, they pushed forward, pouring every ounce of strength and skill into keeping the machine running. For a brief moment, the shaking subsided and the hum stabilized. Hope flickered again, but it didn't last long. A deep rumble shook the compound, louder and more violent than before. Cracks spider-webbed across the walls, and chunks of plaster fell from the ceiling. Outside, fissures opened in the ground, swallowing chunks of pavement and exposing layers of dirt and rock below. It felt like the earth itself was fighting back, resisting the intervention. Voices rose in fear as survivors scrambled to find shelter, clutching loved ones tightly. "Something's wrong," the teenager shouted, pointing to a gauge that was climbing rapidly into the red zone. "The pressure, it's too much." The engineer didn't waste time questioning. He grabbed a fire extinguisher and sprayed foam onto the overheating components, buying precious seconds. "We need to vent the excess energy," he yelled. "Do you see a release valve?" She scanned. The blueprints taped to the wall nearby, her mind racing. "There!" She pointed to a lever on the far side of the machine. Without hesitation, she sprinted toward it, dodging falling debris and leaping over cracks in the floor. The lever was stiff, rusted from disuse, but she threw her entire body weight against it until it finally gave way. A jet of steam shot out, hissing loudly as the pressure dropped slightly. For a moment, the machine seemed to calm down. Its hum softened, and the shaking lessened. The survivors let out a collective sigh of relief, though no one dared celebrate just yet. The battle wasn't over, but then came the worst part. A series of sharp explosions rocked the compound, originating from somewhere deep underground. Dust filled the air, choking everyone who breathed it in. The ground split open wider, threatening to swallow the entire structure whole. People screamed and ran for cover, abandoning any semblance of order. Even the most hardened among them broke down, overwhelmed by the sheer scale of destruction unfolding around them. Through the chaos, the engineer and the teenager remained steadfast. They couldn't afford to falter, not when so much depended on their actions. With the final adjustments made, the engineer shouted, "Activate the core!" "Now?" The teenager hesitated for only a second before flipping the final switch. A blinding flash of light engulfed the room, followed by an eerie silence. The machine powered down, its vibrations fading into nothingness. For a moment, no one moved, no one spoke. All eyes were fixed on the device, waiting for some sign of success or failure. Then, gradually, changes became apparent. The air smelled different, cleaner, fresher. The oppressive haze outside began to lift, revealing patches of pale blue sky peeking through the clouds. Birds, unseen for years, chirped tentatively in the distance. Survivors stepped cautiously outside, squinting at the unfamiliar brightness. Tears streamed down their faces as they realized the impossible. The machine had worked, but victory came at a cost. When the dust settled, the engineer lay unconscious on the floor, injured during the final moments of the activation. Burns covered his arms and blood trickled from a gash on his forehead. The teenager knelt beside him, cradling his head in her lap. "You did it," she whispered, her voice breaking. "We did it." Around them, the compound was in ruins. Walls had collapsed, roofs caved in, and supplies were scattered everywhere. Yet, amid the wreckage, a new sense of purpose took root. Survivors worked together to care for the wounded, salvage what they could, and begin rebuilding. Though exhausted and grieving, they refused to give up. They had proof now that change was possible, that humanity could rise above its failures. As night fell, the teenager sat alone on a pile of rubble, staring up at the stars twinkling faintly in the clearer sky. For the first time in her life, she saw beauty instead of despair. Holding the battered blueprint close to her chest, she whispered a promise to herself and to the world. "We won't make the same mistakes again." The morning after the machine's activation brought a strange mix of emotions. The compound was quiet, save for the occasional sound of birds chirping or wind rustling through broken buildings. It wasn't the silence of despair anymore. It felt lighter, almost hopeful. Survivors wandered cautiously outside, their faces turned toward the sky as if seeing it for the first time. Patches of blue peeked through the lingering haze, and the air smelled fresher than anyone could remember. But beneath this fragile optimism lay a deep weariness. They had survived the impossible, but the scars of what they'd endured would never fully heal. The engineer remained unconscious, his body battered from the ordeal. A group of survivors worked tirelessly to tend to his wounds, using whatever medical supplies they had left. His burns were treated with ointments made from scavenged herbs, and bandages were fashioned out of old cloth. The teenager stayed by his side, refusing to leave even when others urged her to rest. She held his hand tightly, whispering words of encouragement. "You saved us," she said softly. "Now it's our turn to save you." As news spread that the machine had worked at least partially, the mood in the compound shifted. People began talking about the future, something they hadn't dared do in years. What would they rebuild first? How could they ensure they didn't repeat the mistakes of the past? Conversations buzzed with ideas: planting gardens, restoring water sources, teaching children skills that mattered. For the first time in ages, there was a sense of purpose beyond mere survival, but not everyone shared this newfound hope. Some survivors argued that rebuilding was pointless. "We already broke the planet once," one man muttered bitterly. "What makes you think we won't do it again?" Others nodded in agreement, their faces lined with doubt. Memories of starvation, violence, and loss weighed heavily on them. Could humanity really change? Or was this just a temporary reprieve before the cycle of destruction started over? The teenager listened to these arguments silently, her jaw tightening. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a quiet intensity that silenced the room. "Yes, we messed up," she admitted, "but look around. We're still here. That means something. Maybe we can't fix everything overnight, but we have to try. If we don't, then all of this, everything we went through, it'll mean nothing." Her words struck a chord. Slowly, people began nodding, their expressions softening. They knew she was right. Giving up wasn't an option, not after coming so far. One woman stood up, brushing dirt off her hands. "All right," she said firmly. "Let's start small. Who knows how to grow food?" A few hands shot up, including those of older survivors who remembered gardening before the collapse. Together they gathered tools and seeds salvaged from the bunker, heading to a patch of earth near the edge of the compound. The soil was dry and cracked, but they worked tirelessly to prepare it, mixing in ash and compost to enrich it. By sunset, rows of tiny plants dotted the ground beans, squash, and corn. Though it would take weeks for anything to sprout, the act of planting itself felt like a victory. Meanwhile, others focused on repairing the compound. Broken walls were reinforced with wood and metal scraps, while makeshift shelters were built to replace those destroyed during the machine's activation. Children helped where they could, carrying buckets of water or stacking stones. Even the youngest among them understood the importance of what they were doing. This wasn't just about fixing buildings. It was about creating a homeoplace, where life could begin anew. Days turned into weeks, and signs of recovery began appearing beyond the compound. Rivers that had run dry for years started flowing again, their waters clearer than before. Grass pushed through cracks in the pavement, stubbornly reclaiming the land. Birds returned in greater numbers, their songs filling the air with music long absent. Nature seemed determined to heal itself, offering glimpses of the world that once was, and perhaps the world that could be again. The engineer woke up slowly, his mind foggy from days of unconsciousness. At first, he struggled to speak, his throat raw and parched. The teenager sat beside him, holding a cup of water to his lips. "Take it easy," she murmured. "You've been out for a while." When he finally found his voice, his first question was simple: "Did it work?" She smiled, tears welling up in her eyes. "It did. The air's cleaner, the rivers are running, everything's starting to come back." She hesitated, then added, "But we couldn't have done it without you. You risked everything." He shook his head weakly. "Not me, all of us. We did it together." His recovery was slow, but steady. With each passing day, he grew stronger, joining the others in rebuilding efforts. He taught the teenager and a few others how to maintain the machine, emphasizing the importance of keeping it operational. "This isn't just a tool," he told them. "It's proof that we can make things right if we choose to." As months passed, the compound transformed. Gardens flourished, providing fresh produce for everyone. Rainwater collection systems ensured a steady supply of drinking water. Solar panels scavenged from nearby ruins powered lights and basic appliances. Life was still hard, but it was no longer bleak. Laughter returned to the community, along with stories shared around evening fires. One night, as stars glittered overhead, the teenager sat alone with a notebook. She wrote down everything she had learned, the struggles, the sacrifices, the moments of triumph. Her words weren't just for herself. They were for future generations. She wanted them to know what had happened, why the world had nearly ended, and how humanity had clawed its way back from the brink. "We made terrible mistakes," she wrote. "We ignored warnings, chased greed, and forgot how to care for each other and the Earth. But we also proved that we're capable of change. We rebuilt, not because it was easy, but because it was necessary. If you're reading this someday, remember, redemption is possible. Don't wait until it's too late." When she finished writing, she closed the notebook and looked up at the sky. Stars shimmered brightly, untainted by pollution or artificial light. Somewhere out there, she thought, was the universe watching humanity's second chance unfold. Would they succeed this time? Only time would tell. But for now, the Earth was breathing again, and so were the people living on it. In the distance, someone played a guitar, the melody drifting through the cool night air. Voices joined in singing, their tones rough but heartfelt. The song was simple, yet it carried a message of hope. No matter how dark things got, there was always a way forward. Always a reason to keep going, and so, amidst the ruins of the old world, a new chapter began. Imperfect, uncertain, but alive with possibility. Humanity had stumbled, fallen, and risen again. The road ahead would be long and difficult, but for the first time in years it felt worth walking.